Hello, and welcome to Sidechannels, presented by the Fly Fish Journal. My name is Jason Rolfe. I'm the editor of the Fly Fish Journal and the host of Sidechannels, along with our photo editor and my good friend, Kopi Voita. Since 2009, the Fly Fish Journal has been fly fishing's independent voice for culture, people, art, and adventure. Owned by fly fishers and produced near the water. Like our print publication, Sidechannels will feature culture, adventure, art, and conservation through thought-provoking, in-person interviews with fly fishing's most compelling individuals. Visit theflyfishjournal.com/sidechannels to learn more and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's not only a good perspective, it's kind of a requisite perspective in the way things are now, that like you can't count your self-worth on how many fish you hook in a day, because it's unless you're carp fishing, which I don't even want to get into. We could just end there.
Come on, we got a couple more hours.
We can end there. I'll just end it by saying the only way that you can ever get me to unfollow you on Instagram is post a picture of yourself holding a carp and you're dead to me.
That was author Dylan Tomine, and you're listening to Sidechannels, presented by the Fly Fish Journal. My name is Jason Rolfe, and I'm the editor of the Fly Fish Journal as well as your host, along with our photo editor, Kopi Voita. Kopi and I have a long one for you today, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time with a drawn-out intro before we get to the good stuff. Another thing that won't take a bunch of your time is assembling and installing a decked truck bed organizer system in your rig. After I got mine, assembly only took 2 or 3 hours, even with the quote-unquote help of my son, Carver. The quick install meant I could get on to doing more important things with it, like testing out whether or not 6-year-olds can fit in the drawers. Spoiler alert, they can. Visit deck.com/flyfish to learn more, then get out there, get decked, and get after it. Another good way to spend your time is with solid gear that stands up to all the abuse you can throw at it. Patagonia is committed to making goods that last, utilizing clever engineering and innovative materials to offer only essential gear made for a lifetime of hard use. It's a commitment that is matched by their dedication to fighting for and protecting our home planet. Visit patagonia.com/fly-fishing to connect with wild fish and wild places. Dylan Tomine is an author, conservationist, filmmaker, and diehard steelhead bum. He's one of a select handful of writers, among them Kirk Dieter, Chris Santella, Tom Bai, and Greg Keeler, to have been featured in issue 1 of the Fly Fish Journal. And since then, he's been a regular contributor, in addition to publishing widely elsewhere. His fly fishing writing was collected recently in Headwaters, which was published in 2022 by Patagonia Books. And his first book, Closer to the Ground, a beautiful book that I highly recommend, was published in 2012, also by Patagonia Books. Dylan is a Patagonia Fly Fishing Ambassador. He is a dedicated and unapologetic champion for wild fish. And most importantly, he is a really good guy, even if he is a bit harsh when it comes to carp. Kopi and I visited Dylan at his home on Bainbridge Island, where we sat surrounded by the artwork of his brother and various collaborators, including Francis Ashworth, who did the cover art for Headwaters. It was a pleasure to catch up with him, and we probably could have talked for 2 or 3 hours more, but we'll save that for a future episode. Let's do the show. Sort of variations that
microscopic though, but for some reason I can tell, like, I'm like, this one's not good, even though it looks exactly the same.
Yeah. It's like, there's something about it. Then it becomes your lucky hat.
Yeah. And do you
have lucky hats?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have a lifespan, right? Because at some point, at some point you're like, oh, this is like, I got to pick it up with tweezers or something, right? Like get the hemostats to pick it up, because they just start to get nasty after a long period of time, and you can't, there's no salvation. You're not bringing it back. Like, you got to just part with it and start over.
Do you feel like you Do you have like a lucky hat for steelheading and a lucky hat for salmon on the Columbia and a lucky hat for fishing? No.
I have fishing hat. I have hats that actually, it's funny because there's like 50 hats in my closet and some of them say good fish inside and I'll test them for a while. And if we have a great day, then that becomes the one until it's worn out.
That's a good idea.
You've like marked them after.
Yeah.
Like
I write with the pen in them so I can remember because a lot of them, I have the deal with Patagonia. And so I'll get a bunch of hats that are all the same. But they're not all the same. There's magical powers in some of them, but you don't know until you try them, Yeah. And then if you go and have a horrible day, some shitty stuff happens or whatever, then that one's like out of the rotation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think mine just end up like one hat ends up with a bunch of steelhead flies in it. So that just becomes the steelheading hat.
Easily identifiable.
Because the other hat has the trout flies in it from last summer. So that's the trout fishing hat.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't ever stick flies in my hat because either they're barbless and they fall out or they have a barb and I can't get them out without tearing up the hat. So
I always try not to, for the longest time. And then eventually I end up sticking one in my hat.
It's such a handy place for me. Like I do use it as a fly box, but generally it's like the day that I'm fishing, or if it's multiple days in a row, I'll leave them in. But like afterwards, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm taking these out.
But barbed or barbless?
Barbless. I mean,
and they don't just fall out when you're like going through the brush.
I'm not saying I've never lost any, but like, I feel like usually they stay. I kind of do try and make sure they're in there pretty good. And
like twice, like in and then back out.
Sometimes, I'll go in and back out. Yeah.
We'll have to show you our tech.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like, do we need to start the company that's the little fly patch that is the perfect kind of wool or foam or whatever?
I feel like that glues onto your hat, doesn't it? Or at least there's those little things that you can like pin to your hat. But maybe not
further proving, like, somebody was asking me like, oh, how come like surf is a big deal at Patagonia and, fly fishing doesn't get as much play. I'm like, hey, every kid in America wants to look like a surfer. No kid in America wants to look like a fly fisherman, right? So it's not going to improve by having these wool patches glued to the fronts of our hats. I'm pretty sure that's not going to work.
All the dorky accessories.
Yeah. There is sort of this trend of just sort of ultra accessorizing. It seems like
for fishing or
for fishing. Oh yeah. Not surfing, surfing. Like, I mean, you surf with the kids, like you throw a wetsuit and a board in your car and you're surfing.
Yeah. The thing, the mystery,
which is wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's nice. The mystery to me about surf though, is where do you put your shit when you're in the water? Right? Like, so I have a key fob. Yeah. I have like a phone and a wallet, right? And I don't want to leave it in the car and I don't want to just leave it sitting on the beach. So like, I haven't figured it out yet.
I just hide my key.
That's another,
which is
another business thing is like, I thought if you had post office boxes that you rented with your credit card that just opened at the beach and, for $10, you could unlock this thing, take the key with you.
I wonder if there are at like really popular surf spots or beaches.
I don't know if anybody's listening and does it. I want 10%. All right. Like there's your idea. There's your free idea for the day. But yeah, I think
surf box.
I do think that fly fishing is very gear intensive and has become more gear intensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's a good thing. I think I don't know. I'm just getting stuff ready to go. The kids and I are going to Montana next week to fish. And I'm like, oh God, there's like 3 different kinds of floatant that needs to go in everybody's bag. There's the powdery stuff, there's the liquid stuff, and then the shaky stuff to like dry out your foot. There's just so many little doodads that we get used to and feel like we want to have all the time. And it's, I guess it's, in some ways it's good. It's keeping the industry afloat, right? You can sell something else, but
I mean, it is one of those funny things. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I do find it entertaining. And I mean, there's, people that find value in having all that stuff, more power to them. I tend to go pretty simple.
I think try to, but it's hard, man.
Well, you're always carrying a pile of camera gear. Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like if you didn't have a bag full of camera gear with you,
it would be
every time you
filled up with other fly fishing stuff.
You think so?
Sure.
Oh, so you're just a Sherpa at heart. Like you're going to pack a load no matter what.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you go out fishing with Kopi and just pick up his bag sometime.
I just got a new bag because I had one fail. The zipper failed and I used it a few times. And then I went back to an older bag with a good zipper because the new one was bigger. And I was like, if I start with something smaller, then I can't fit as much stuff into it. Yeah. I'm trying to trick myself. Yeah,
it's weird. I fish with guys that have just like the snack size Ziploc bag with a bunch of ratty flies in there. And that's kind of it. Maybe, a little spool of 15-pound Maxima, and that's kind of it. And then I fish with guys that have, 7,000 flies on them for and part of it, like that's the difference between trout and steelhead is like, trout fishing, you got to have a lot of flies, which is probably why I suck at it. Cause it's like, it's just mind blowing when you look at,
isn't it?
Yeah. I think steelhead fishing, if you just give me a black woolly bugger and a sink tip, I'll fish all day and be happy,
It is pretty nice. I mean, being, at this point, it's been 10 years or so, but being new to kind of steelhead fishing still, or at least I feel like it in that sense, like it was like, oh yeah, like just one box of like a handful of flies and some tippet material and maybe an extra head or some sink tips. And it's like, that's all you need. Like, you're pretty much good, as opposed to coming from trout centric Colorado where it's like, boom, like freaking dry flies, nymphs, streamers, emergers, freaking cripples, like.
Yeah. And then you have one fly and it's like the surface film version and the 2 feet deep version. And then the like bead head version, it makes you crazy. And it's always the one I don't have with the guy downstream from me that's just wailing on the fish. And you're like, what and it's a hare's ear. Oh, great. Like that's what I'm fishing.
Which one of the 20 versions out there? Like,
yeah.
Do you ever try to go to the other end of that spectrum? Like, Yvon Chouinard does and just like, what's he fish one fly nowadays for trout?
Yeah. He's pretty much
variations on like a
pheasant tail wet fly, soft hackle is all the time. And it's a crazy effective fly. I mean, I have several boxes that he tied for me that the kids fight over all the time. Especially like middle of the day when there's no hatch or something, you could keep catching fish, you know? But really, I think for me, trout fishing is just really about dry flies. Like I'm not very good at it and I don't really enjoy it fishing nymphs. And so, I don't know, one came before the other, probably that I wasn't good at it. So I decided not to like it, but,
well, it's a temperament thing too, right? I mean, you're a guy that has been dedicated to swinging flies for steelhead for 30, 40 years.
Yeah. I don't need a lot of fish. I don't need a lot of fish. And with trout, I don't think they're like, every once in a while you get like some crazy great trout. You've been working on him for 7 flies and
project fish,
but for the most part, like it's just the rise to a dry that is exciting to me.
Yeah.
I've been really lucky to be able to fish a bunch with Craig Matthews and, who's probably the greatest dry fly fisherman in North America. And there's so much to learn from him, most of which is just sit in one place quietly and don't cast more than 15 feet, and it's remarkably effective. And we've been fishing, the kids and I have been fishing with him for years, and every year just learn something new. I was going to say,
you feel like you still learn something.
Every time.
From these guys?
I mean, there's so much in that guy's brain from fly design.
That funny how guys like that just,
I think it's because he's like unendingly curious. Like he's always trying to solve problems. He could very easily just go, this is my program and I do this and I catch fish every night or every morning or whatever. But I think he's constantly, okay, like what's going on here? Why is this working? Why isn't this working? What if I refine that more? And, you know, I mean, I think about like his pattern, the iris caddis, which is like, you know, one of the ugliest dry flies ever. And you look at it and go, this can't work. And
what is it? The iris?
Yeah.
IRIS?
Yeah. It's
what
like,
is it?
It's an emerger. It's a caddis emerger with like, you know, it just looks like a piece of lint. Like it's a terrible looking fly, but you know, he figured out that sometimes the fish are keying in on this specific stage.
Yeah.
And you know, the last 3 years, in a blizzard of caddis in the evening on the Madison, where those fish are picked over pretty hard and we can't get them on any kind of regular caddis pattern. You put that on and it's just fish after fish, you know, and that was because I think he saw the pressure that these fish are not just eating an elk hair caddis every 2 seconds and, you know, trying to figure that out. And so I think, you know, our behavior modifies the fish's behavior, and then the fish's behavior modifies our behavior if we're curious and smart. And so, yeah, it's an unending sort of learning process.
Are you fishing with him next week when you guys head out there? You're gonna
hopefully we can find some cool water. I'm distressed right now because today, as we're recording this, the first of the hoot owl restrictions are starting to happen, and you know, and it might just be for years. We went last week of July and it was always fine, but 2 years ago it was mess. Yeah, I guess it was 2 years ago. Same thing. And then this year it looks like it's probably going to happen. And what I was saying earlier of just, it's that evening dry fly fish that I really love going there for. So without that, then you start thinking, okay, what are we going to do? Maybe we're going to snorkel a bunch. Maybe we're, you know, I don't know how many times you can go look at Old Faithful, but you know,
will you guys be in the park?
We make day trips to the park, you know, here and there, but we'll stay like on the Madison.
That is a place I haven't been to in a long time, and I really want to go back to the park. I fished up Slough Creek, like up in the meadows years ago, and
didn't get eaten by a bear.
Didn't get eaten by a bear, and had like some of the best at that point in my life, especially. That was the best trout fishing I'd ever experienced.
Yeah, I think it's still good. I mean, you know, and for me, like Yellowstone is just this miraculous place. I mean,
it's amazing.
It's, you know, it's somebody who's like the American Serengeti or something, you know, that you go there and the geology is so amazing and the critters are so amazing and the scenery. And then for me, just that part of the world, Southwest Montana, you know, I guess Northwest Wyoming, Southeast Idaho. I think the quality of the light is better there than anywhere else in the world. You know, well, Kopi, you're a photographer, right? Like you're always waiting around for the golden hour in the evening or in the morning. Like even at noon stuff is beautiful in Southwest Montana, you know? And I was just thinking like, boy, if I was a painter, I'd live here. You know?
A lot of them would come out of there, right?
If I was a photographer, I'd live here, you know, and I'm neither, but I walk around even at noon and go, why is the light glowing? Why is it so beautiful even in the middle of the day, you know? And then when you get into evening, you know, the light there is just fantastic.
I don't doubt it. I haven't spent enough time there to make kind of a strong opinion, in an agreement or disagreement with you on that one. But yeah, I have no doubt.
It's a weird thing. I think it's some combination of the latitude and the altitude and who knows what else, but for some reason it just everything looks better there to me.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, have you talked to Craig about what the fishing might be like in the evenings if you guys get to do it? Will you be fishing those caddis hatcheries?
I was just texting him and he's saying it's not looking good for evening being open just because there's so much hot weather in a row. And I think, this is a trend that for me is just more recent, and you can just see this climate change thing is happening in ways that are, catastrophic in a lot of places in the country. And I guess me looking forward to evening dry fly fishing is also kind of catastrophic.
Well, it's showing
I take that back. I mean, I'm not comparing this to hurricanes and tsunamis and whatever, but I do think it ranges from inconvenience to death in a lot of cases. And it's 100%,
just, yeah.
We're seeing it seems like every year that it's more and more, has more and more impact on just regular people. You don't have to be living in a specific place or doing a specific thing to be seeing what's going on with the climate.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's one of those things where I think there are people in the world for whom climate change is in their life, it's going to show up in big, devastating ways. Yeah. And then there are people in the world who climate change is probably more often going to show up in small ways like that, inconveniences and things like that. And it's, there's almost this sense of if you could get those people to realize what all those little inconveniences are adding up to, you might be able to move the needle a little bit, right?
Yeah, I don't pretend to know, what the answer is. It's increasingly distressing to me, I think, especially with one of the two major parties in this country that are pretty much just intent on ignoring it, or in fact, even changing things to make it more likely. Deregulation and all that sort of stuff. And so I'm concerned. I mean, I think, and the speed at which it went from not being noticeable within my life at all to where it is now, where we're seeing these, catastrophic winter scouring stream flow events. We're seeing these hot water issues. If you're a cold water fisherman, you can't not see it. Even, in Southwest Montana at 6,000 feet of altitude, it's, the water's too hot by the middle of July.
A week or two of smoky skies. If wildfires aren't closer than that to you, but even just in the past 5-6 years since I've been in Bellingham for 10 now, but in the past 5 or 6, I feel like it's, almost like a given now that there might be a solid week, if not more, of really smoky skies that settles in on the Northwest. And it's not always from, super close fires, but just, in the West, then that stuff drifts over and kind of, the first handful of years I was here, it kind of didn't seem like it was happening every year. And now, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it might just be my memory and shifting baselines, but I don't remember hot water issues through most of my life. I don't remember smoke. I mean, I've lived in the Northwest my whole life. And until, maybe 8 years ago or something, we never had these huge smoke events out here.
Yeah, I don't remember it growing up.
Yeah. And now, the last 2 years, we haven't had the smoke here in late summer. And it's been like, oh, this is miraculous. What a great year. So I think it's on us, and I don't think it's going to get better. I think, it seems like what the scientists are saying is the best we can hope for is slowing down the acceleration. Mm-hmm. But I know if we don't do anything, we're fucked.
I was listening to so you and I talked on a podcast, it was 7 years ago.
Wow,
which is crazy to me. That was also the first podcast interview that I ever did or conducted.
Wow. All right. What an honor. Okay.
Yeah. For the fly tapes. And it was fun to listen to it because I definitely haven't listened back to it for, 6 years or something. But something you said in that one was that you had, you were talking about how your writing had gone from, writing these stories about fishing for steelhead and, being a guide and, basically fishing focused stories to this shift more to conservation. And you said you you were writing about conservation, maybe through a fishing lens, but the people that you were spending time with, you mentioned Yvon Chouinard and a few others, had at that time sort of really opened your eyes to everything that was happening sort of in the background. And I wonder if that's, if that's still the case. Are you still in that place where you're more focused on conservation? I mean, you've done so much work in conservation and in steelhead advocacy and around dam removals and all that kind of stuff. But are you still, do you still find yourself drawn to that? Do you find yourself exhausted by it all? Do you find yourself just
it's tough,
cynical and pessimistic?
No, I wouldn't say I'm cynical and pessimistic. I think
because I'm cynical and pessimistic all the time.
It's, when I started, it was just because I didn't know what else to do. I saw this thing that I loved disappearing, and salmon and steelhead, right? The Skykomish River in particular. And I just thought, well, I don't have millions of dollars. I don't have political clout. Like, the best I can do is write about it in a way that's easily digestible by my fellow fishermen.
Yeah.
And I'll take the time and kind of do the research and put it all in one place so that people can, quote it at a cocktail party. You can say, we produced a spring Chinook in a hatchery that cost $68,031 per fish.
Yeah.
Which still blows me away. But I mean, it's an interesting question, Jason, coming out of us talking 7 years ago, because I think what happened is that I went into it unprepared for how bleak the science really was.
Went into
writing about, researching about conservation stuff. And, the first really big piece I wrote about that was a State of the Steelhead story. That I was depressed for months after publishing that.
Was that in, where was that published?
It was originally published in, what was that? I think it was called, might have been Fish and Fly or something like that.
Okay.
And I think it kind of knocked me for a loop, and then I kind of regained my bearings and went, okay, I can do this. And, went at it pretty hard. We made Artifishal, the film with Patagonia, about fish hatcheries and fish farms, which I still think are one of, the really major problems, and political will aside, like the simplest thing to fix, just stop spending money on them.
Yeah.
Woo, that's awesome, And so as a writer, especially when we were putting together Headwaters, you can see this very clear progression of going from this experiential adventure writer, like gung-ho, like let's go have a crazy awesome time traveling the world and fishing, to being very heavily, like almost scientifically minded, trying to gather all the facts and figures around this decline of salmon and steelhead.
Yeah.
And the back third of that book, which represents a more recent writing, is much more personal. I think it's much more about interactions between people, emotional impacts, I guess, of different experiences. And so I think what I would like to be able to find is ways that are more, less didactic, less, like here's the science, and more ways of weaving it into personal stories so that it's easier to digest, it's easier to remember. I heard you talking to David James Duncan about this in the other Sidechannels, which awesome interview, by the way.
Oh man, that was a fun one.
I've listened to,
he was such a great guy.
Yeah. So talkative.
He was
and
such a pleasure.
I listened to the interview with him on Mountain and Prairie as well, Ed Roberson's podcast, which was also really good.
Yeah.
And then he came here and did a reading when he was touring with Sunhouse.
Oh, cool. On Bainbridge?
Yeah. He was here on Bainbridge, and I went to go see him at Eagle Harbor Books.
Yeah.
And we went to dinner afterwards. I had dinner, and what what a great character. Like he's just such an interesting guy. He's got all these great stories.
Yeah.
And at 9 p.m. or maybe it was 10 p.m., it was like he looked at his watch and I looked at my watch and it was 10 p.m. and he hit the table with both hands and he goes, "I'm done." And he just got up and walked out. And then it was weird. I was like, whoa, like, there was some other people had joined us, and everybody's kind of looking at each other and go, oh, I guess like, he turns into a pumpkin or something. It was just
maybe.
like, boom.
When we talked to him, we kind of did the same thing. We finished the interview and he was like, well, let's have a drink.
Yeah.
And he was just grabbing us, some waters to drink before we left. But, he was a real pleasure, a real, very, very sweet, genuine person.
Yeah. And I think,
so extraordinarily thoughtful about the world and
so smart. Wow. And I think he's also I noticed from your interview, he's the world's greatest not answering the question you're asked guy ever. Like it was like, I don't know if he just had a list of what he was going to talk about or what, but it was so I could hear you going, but wait, back to Missoula. Wait a second now back to, but I loved it because that's just him, and I hadn't actually met him before he came here. And so I was really, I've read his stuff, all of it forever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this had the best impact, but I got to tell him my theory about the River Wye, which is that everybody reads it.
Yeah.
All the fishing guides, fishing young dudes, and they remember this amazing romance of finding Eddie, your fish girl, like the dream romance for any fishing guy.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's all I remembered from reading it when I was guiding in Alaska. I was like, I remember just thinking, man, this is so cool. Like what a romance. Like I could find my fish girl. And then I read it again a few years ago. And I was like, whoa, like this is like this heavy, religious treatise on like the different aspects of religion and belief and faith and all.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy smokes. And it was actually really difficult. Like it was a very challenging read.
Yeah.
And I remember breezing through it in like 2 nights when I was guiding and going like, woohoo,
Well, isn't that funny though, how books can, I think everybody does that with books. So I could take a book that I read 20 years ago and had that experience 20 years ago and then read it again now. And it would be a totally different book. Books change with us.
With the reader. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So my theory on the River Wye is that 90% of the fish guy readers read it as a fun romance between a fishing guy who found his girl who loves to fish. And probably a lot of the other stuff just, I don't know, like I must have just skimmed over it or something. Like I didn't remember any of that. And then now, in contrast, having read Sun House, you can see that's the main point of everything he does. Like that's what he's really thinking about is these questions of faith. And, I think religion's maybe not a word he would agree with, but for lack of
spirituality.
Yeah. For lack of a better term in my limited vocabulary, I would say that, that there are different aspects of what we call religion. So so I was telling him that was my theory of the River Wye, and he looked pretty skeptical because I think, and no, that wasn't right when he said I'm done and got up and left. But I think
it's like, nice try.
Yeah.
We'll see you later.
Yeah. But so anyway, I'm doing the David James Duncan thing here of going way away from whatever it was you asked.
I don't even remember what we were on, but where are you at? So Headwaters was published. That's another thing I realized in listening to that old interview from 7 years ago is you mentioned that you were working on a collection of your fishing essays.
I'm real slow. 5
years later it gets published. So 2 years ago now, 2022, gets published as Headwaters. It's a collection of your work from like the early 90s. Is that? Yeah. So early 90s up through 2021, essentially.
Yeah, no, actually it's from the early 2000s, I think.
Oh, okay.
Through 2021. So it's about a 20-year like arc. And like I was saying before, I think there's pretty much clearly three sections to it. They're not divided as such, but you can see that it's like this adventure stuff that's pretty self-centered. I think, I think they're fun to read, but they're not.
Stuff in there.
And then it goes into some very, I think, much more nuts and bolts conservation writing. And then towards the end, it's a lot more about personal relationships.
Was that last piece of it? Do you think your kids wouldn't have been that young. They're Skyla's in her first year of college now?
Yeah, she just finished her sophomore year. So she's 20. Yeah.
Okay. And then Weston's still in high school?
Yeah, he'll be a senior this fall.
Do you mind them being named?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So they would have obviously been 7 years younger. But I guess when I'm asking that third of the book that is people-centered, do you think that's from having a family, from having young kids? Is that where those stories came from? Or is it more just you were trying to, like you said, steer away from that sort of more didactic, telling people raising the alarm. Here's a big problem with steelhead, with climate and so on.
Well, first of all, that more raising the alarm stuff, I don't think it worked.
Really?
Well, it's tough to measure, but there's been very little tangible improvement on how we manage salmon or steelhead during my whole career, and even I thought at one point I was like, okay, we need to make a film because that's where there's impact. And we got the funding and we made Artifishal, and that didn't really change anything, And so I think some of it was that it wasn't a conscious decision to move away from that. I think it was more that, writing for me is kind of just an expensive hobby. And that was where, I'm more interested in reading about personal relationships within the context of fishing now. I'm more interested in, I still want to be able to showcase the value of being able to go fish and to have these places that are clean and cold and everything we love about them.
Yeah.
And I may get back to more of that sort of hard hitting journalism, sort of environmental writing. But I think what I'm more interested in now is, and as it was towards the last third of that book, it just seemed like my interest was more around, human relationships.
Do you say that it's an expensive hobby because it forces you to travel? Because from my eyes, a photographer's eyes, hanging out around with so many writers, I'm so jealous because it's you guys basically need a pen and a pad of paper to do a lot of what you want to do.
No way, man.
Copy. The $2,000 MacBook
so jealous.
is absolutely essential to the life of a writer.
MacBook Pro, come on.
Yeah.
Man. Maybe you can get a sponsorship from Apple for that little mention. No, I hear what you're saying. I say that sort of facetiously, but it's because I have yet to figure out how to make a living just writing what I want to write, or even assign journalism. I'm not fast enough to make a living writing like that.
Yeah.
So I have, especially with one kid in college and another one about to be in college, I had to take a full-time job.
Yeah.
And so, I'm super excited. I'm working on a novel now that I really, really like. I think it's going to be pretty cool, but I can't work on it during my prime thinking hours.
Right. Or as much as maybe you would like to, or have when you were working on your previous ones or whatnot.
Yeah.
I remember you saying that when you were writing Closer to the Ground, that was like a midnight to 3 a.m. Are you back on that schedule?
No, I've changed a little bit because I was working then too, but I didn't have a full-time job. Now I have a real job. And so, it basically means I'm in Zoom meetings all day. So I think this is actually a book I've been trying to write for 30 years, probably.
Yeah.
And I was really working on it. And it's a thing about human relationships, but in the context of eco-terrorism, in the face of as a last resort, in the face of, all the destruction that has happened in our lifetimes. Yeah. But it's more about the people. within that sort of context. And I had started to write this literally, probably 25 years ago, about in the setting of where I had worked in Alaska, in Bristol Bay.
What was the impetus for it back then? Because if I think about like what you're describing now, it's like, oh yeah, obviously, like the world is falling apart, that makes sense. But 25 years ago, it may not have felt I was young then too, but I wonder what the impetus was.
Why you got to point out how much older I am than you?
You're
like, come on, man.
Older. What are you, 10 years older?
So yeah, if you're 17, the impetus there was that, I was working in Bristol Bay, and there was some mine exploration going on around then. And it was always these guys would charter float planes or helicopters or whatever and say, oh, we're geology grad students.
Oh, was that the beginnings of Pebble?
I think they were looking around, right? And so it wasn't just that. I think there were a number of companies looking for mineral deposits around the area. And there was always things, where you'd talk to a pilot and they'd say, yeah, we had these grad students, but they were like 50 years old and they had like mining logos on their like equipment cases,
Jesus.
And after that, after I had been working up there, I had these recurring nightmares of the river that I worked on, the Alagnac, being developed. Like I would wake up in a cold sweat, like weirdly of like condos being built or like just these sort of weird, disturbing dreams. And so I had tried to write this story in that setting with a main character who was basically like me disguised around what I would do if I was more committed to this. And then, I don't know, 10 years went by. I had a pretty large chunks of manuscripts, but I didn't really like any of it. I just was like, okay, I'm just doing this, and then.
Are you liking it better now?
Yeah, a lot. And so not a while ago, I was driving to a book event, not mine. A friend of mine had a book launch event and I was driving there, and like halfway there, I was like, oh, it's not in Alaska. It's in British Columbia, and it's not me. It's a teenage girl. That's what it is. And I pulled over and I started scribbling on like maps and pieces of paper in the thing. And I missed the first half of my friend's book launch thing because I was on the side of the road. And, but I was scared of it. Like, I was like, okay, now I know how this works, but it's kind of scary to like to change course and whatever. And in the meantime, I'd publish Closer to the Ground. Like, project opportunities kept coming up. Then we made Artifishal, and that was 2 years. And then, in Close to the Ground took me 3 years probably to write and get it published. And then I was just starting to think, okay, I got to get serious about this novel. But also I haven't written long fiction, so it might totally suck. Like if you're a potential publisher listening to this, it's going to sell 1 million. It's going to be awesome. For everybody else, I would say I don't know at this point if it's good, but I'm enjoying the process. So, but then, we had the lockdown, and I didn't really have the energy to work on this huge project. And so what seemed to make sense was like, oh, let's pull together Headwaters and write some new pieces, but have some old pieces. And as that came together, working with the publisher, I could see that, there is a cohesive story here. It's the evolution of how somebody thinks about fishing, and the role it plays in your life. And my guess is for you guys too, that how you think about fishing and the role it plays in your life changes. You have kids, you change jobs, you just get older, and so that was very absorbing. Like I really like that we were able to pull that sort of thing together. So it's not just a random collection of stories. It's telling a bigger story. I think that was one of the things that I thought was really remarkable about the book was that, one question first is the form of the book. So the book is, a lot of work. Headwaters is a lot of work that has, been published over the last 20 years or so. Some new pieces. And then these sort of shorter, I don't know what you would call them, vignettes, snapshots.
Yeah, exactly. Snapshots that are, there's a year that goes with it. It starts in 1969, I think. Yeah. And it's like you and your mom and dad, somewhere. And then the last one is 2020. I wrote it down. Yeah. July 2020. I think it was you and the kids somewhere.
Oh yeah. So the first one in 1969, I was like a toddler, and it was my dad coming back from fishing. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so that is the whole course.
So I guess what I was wondering, just on kind of more on the technical side, is that something that you went into the book with that idea of seeing that progression, or did it take sitting down with all of that, with that body of work from 2000 to 2021 and saying, I see now that I've, over this period of time, my views and feelings and opinions about fishing have changed? Or was it a mix of both?
Well, it's weird because there's two timelines in Headwaters, right? And one is this 50-year span of from me being a little kid watching my dad fish to me taking my kids fishing. And that's represented in those little snapshots. I mean, they're like a paragraph at most, right? Mm-hmm. And those are threaded all through the book. Then, without ever specifically addressing it, the stories are a 20-year arc of publishing and sort of what I was thinking about then. So I never really knew if those two timelines would confuse people or if it would be weird. I think, the breakthrough for me actually came out of the title, which was the piece of the title that says The Evolution of a Fly Fisherman. It's part of the subtitle. And that came from Melinda Chenard, of all people, that she was saying, we were trying to figure out the title and all that sort of stuff. I was going to go with Huck Finn, but it just seemed like
it's taken.
Yeah, it's taken. Actually, did you know that there's no copyrights on book titles? You can name it exactly the same. You could call it War and Peace. You can call,
I think I've heard that about like album titles too.
Yeah, it's weird. But anyway, when we were casting around trying to find the right title for it, Melinda said, this is really about evolution, like the evolution of thinking and I was like, that's it. And that helped me combine those pieces into that timeline. Yeah. Because those were originally going to be published as one story in there, just like all together.
The little vignettes?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And that
I think it's so great that they got separated out like that.
Yeah, that actual piece, the middle part of that, from being about a teenager to being an adult, was published in the 30-year anniversary of the Sage catalog, the Sage Fly Rod catalog.
Cool.
So we had this timeline of 30 years of Sage and then 30 years of one angler, like how they evolved during that time. And so when we put it in there, I added some from when I was younger and some from when I was older, and it just seemed to fit. And, I mean, I don't know how successful it is. Like,
that was the other thing I was going to say is, I had the experience of being somebody who had read a lot of your work. And, from like Close to the Ground, I remember getting that book and reading it. And I was like, this is the kind of family I want to have. Like, I think that's such a wonderful book. And, it is a great book. But, I'd read a lot of your essays in the Fly Fish Journal, in the Drake, other publications. And so I thought, well, I'm really excited that Dylan has this new book out, but I know it all.
You read it all.
Was my feeling going into it. Then I got it, sat down with one night and started reading it. And I read like halfway through the book in one sitting. And I think it was that decision, that sort of creative decision to lay it out that way, have those vignettes there, and whatnot, that it just like, it kept me going. And I was reading essays that I'd read before.
You. Yeah, no, that's nice.
And so I think from my perspective, it worked well. It added something to, a body of work that I was familiar with that made it fresh.
Well, thanks. I mean, especially coming from you, that means a lot. I mean, I really appreciate it. Yeah. And I think, my brother, I sent it to my brother when it was still in manuscript form. And I was like, hey, my brother is the great indoorsman. Like, I'm like, lives in New York City or in Brooklyn, doesn't fish, doesn't hunt, doesn't, And I said, I don't know if you're even going to be into this because it's pretty fly fish centric book, but if you have time, read it, see what you think. And then he read it and he called me and he said, this isn't about fly fishing. It's about divorce and raising children and all that sort of stuff. He's like, I just ignored all the fishing shit, but that's what it was about. And I thought, okay, well, if that succeeds in that way, and I'm not the person to say if it does or not, but if it does, then I think there's some axiom, at least personally to me, is that like great fly fishing writing, I mean, there's a lot of fly fishing writing. A lot of it's really bad, and some of it is spectacularly good. But the stuff that I've always gravitated to and really enjoyed is that those are stories that are not just about fly fishing.
Yeah.
That there's always, and, I think you can take it too far. There's the sporting journal whose name I won't pronounce, that every single one is the last fishing trip with your buddy who's dying of cancer. And and that to me is too much. That's hard for me to read. But then there's the other side of it of just, we went fishing and caught this many fish and whatever. And that's not, and so.
And this is how we did it.
Yeah, I think, or, 27 ways to nymph without a fly line.
How to catch more fish.
Which, I mean, it's easy to make fun of, and it probably just means I'm a dick. But my reading preference for fly fishing is really narrow. And so I was just trying to write a book that if I didn't know me, I would enjoy reading. And maybe that's the best you can do with any of those decisions that you make creatively.
Yeah. 2 years away from the publication of it now, like how has it sort of aged for you? What do you feel like you accomplished what you set out to do with Headwaters? Do you feel like you didn't? Do you feel like it's hard to been successful, or is it just hard to tell?
It's hard to tell. You launch these things out into the world, and I guess, I guess I've been doing this long enough. I'm not expecting a parade.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say. I mean, I think, there was lots of nice commentary about it. On social media, there was really nice reviews from a lot of pretty prestigious publications. And I take it all, with a little grain of salt, but you can't help but feel your ego stroked a little bit around those. I think the coolest thing that I saw around it was at some point, I won't say her name, but there's a woman fly fisherman who's pretty big on Instagram. And she had published a picture of just herself reading it in the back of her pickup truck in a rainstorm. And she said, Headwaters is like a book club where we're all reading the same book at the same time. And I thought, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
2, that's so kind that she would think to do that.
Yeah.
And 3, like, damn, I have a good publicist. And that was, I mean, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, is this even too much? Because Stephanie Ridge, who I consider like one of the great book publicists, period, but she carpet bombed the fly fishing world with Headwaters.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for that. Yeah. And but I hope, I think it's a really beautiful physical book. The designers and Francie Ashforth's art in there, like it made it a really beautiful. And so I hope that people will think of it as like a gift to give to somebody.
You've worked with a couple of great artists for your 2 books. Nikki McClure did Closer to the Ground.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, she's a great Olympia, Washington based artist. I think she's still based down there.
Yeah. I told you how that happened before. Didn't we talk about
right? That? She just wanted a wetsuit.
No, she just didn't want to do it. Didn't want to work with me or anything. And I kept calling her. And it started because...
Were you just aware of her just from living in the Northwest?
No, when when the manuscript was done, I sent it to Dave Guterson, the great novelist who wrote Snow Falling on Cedar and East of the Mountains. And and he had invited me over for dinner. And when I got there, and it was him just being a really nice person. And
did you know him?
A little bit. Yeah.
Is he here on?
Yeah. He lives on Bainbridge.
Okay.
And he actually, forced his agent to take me on as a client because I couldn't get an agent to save my life, So he's one of those guys, Dave Guterson, Tom McGuane, who have gone so far above and beyond to help me.
I mean, what a vote of confidence, right? Somebody trying to publish their first book.
I think still to this day, the most thrilling moment of anything I've published was the day that Tom McGuane said he would write the foreword for Closer to the Ground.
Yeah.
And then the second was the day he sent it to me, and it was so kind. And so, and I've also sent pieces to Tom McGuane that he is just savaged, and so it wasn't all like rainbows and unicorns.
But that's almost good, right? Because he was being honest.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things I would put is just that there have been people who are very established writers who went out of their way just to be kind to me and just out of being nice people. But anyway, I had sent the manuscript to Dave Guterson and was at his house for dinner. And when I pulled up, he's like, "Hey, I found the artist for you. Like I know exactly who needs to do the illustrations for Closer to the Ground." And I was like, "Who is he?" "Her name's Nikki McClure. Like, here, I'll show you." And we went online and I was like, "Sweet, awesome. Call her up. Like, let's get her on the phone." And he goes, "Oh, I don't know her. I just thought it would be perfect. Like you guys
that's up to you."
Yeah. So I found her the same way I found Francie, was just like internet stalking.
Yeah.
And found a phone number and called her. And it was almost identical to both times. I was all scared and nervous. Like I was asking the head cheerleader out to the prom or something, and Nikki McClure, I go, "Hey, I wrote this book and it feels like your art would really fit with it." And she just goes, "No." And then I called her a week later and I was like, "Hey, it's me again." And she's like, "No, I don't have time." And I didn't realize like how big time she was at during that time period. And then I saw that she was having a career retrospective at the Art Institute of Chicago and a bunch of other things. I was like, "Oh shit. Like this is big time." But
I just wrote Martin Scorsese and asked him if he would.
If he'd look at my script. And so I wore her down. I called her like every week for like 3 months and she finally caved in.
That's so funny. Yeah. She's great. She's great. I see her stuff all over Olympia. Our public library cards are Nikki McClure.
Yeah. She's so good. She is so
co-op.
good.
Yeah. How did you meet Francie? How did you get connected?
Saw one of her prints very similar to the one right there.
Is that hers?
Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering.
Online. I was just like scrolling through Instagram and I was like, wow, this water and clouds.
So it's that easy, huh?
It's so beautiful. And I'm just a sucker for kind of abstract landscapes.
Yeah.
You can see them here, the Francie and that one. And and so I just sent her a fanboy letter. Like I just sent a DM. I saw it. No, actually it was somebody else had posted it. So I just I searched her on Instagram and found her Instagram and sent her a DM and said, "Hey, I don't have any money. I'm not going to buy anything. I just wanted to tell you I absolutely love your work," or whatever. And she sent me a big care package with like some prints that were seconds and her postcards and all that stuff. And then like a year later, she was doing a project that had writing with her prints, and she asked me if I'd contribute one. And so we did a page of that folio together.
Oh, cool. Is that something that's in book form
it's like loose folio sheets of a print with some words on it, with a lot of people that are more interesting and famous than me. But we And then we just kind of got to be friends. And
cool.
So when Headwaters was ready, I was just like, hey, like, would you be interested in doing this? And she did it. And it was really a fun process. We worked through all the drawings together. And she's currently, I don't know if I should say this,
because she has sketches throughout the book as well, right?
Yeah.
Not just the cover's beautiful, but
and then the cover
sketches.
is a painting. Yeah. But the sketches she did internally as well.
Yeah.
And she's actually, I don't know, you might have to edit this out later, but I just called her and asked her if she's drawing a steelhead for a tattoo for me. So,
cool.
So I'm going to have some wearable art from Francie.
Cool. Where's she located?
She lives in near Sun Valley part of the time, and then in Connecticut part of the time.
Cool.
And she's been really active for years with the Freshwater Trust and a bunch of other conservation sort of things, does a lot of fundraisers for them. And I think, as the value of her work has gone up, that she's been able to, do shows that call attention to various kind of conservation issues and stuff. So,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I think, and I don't know, pardon me, I'm not positive if it is in Headwaters because I haven't read it. But a piece of yours, and I think you titled it, "This is Fly Fishing." It was kind of, I first saw it in a Patagonia,
that's in Headwaters
mailer.
Oh,
it was a small, in a little lookbook. And I was working in a fly shop. It had to have been I forget exactly, 2008, 2009 or 10. And I was, I'd finished school. I was starting to have a few of my pictures published, in the Drake and maybe the Fly Fish Journal. And
I remember seeing some of your early photos too, and going like, "Who's this dude?" Jesus, that's interesting.
How do you pronounce this guy's name?
No, that wasn't my first thought.
This guy must be weird.
No, you and I have probably the second least pronounceable name in the fly fish world, and so you and I can have a contest over who has the weirdest name.
But I remember, getting that mailer at the shop and reading through it. And I forget if there was other people's words interspersed in there, but it was also it was almost like a zine, kind of a little photo book as well. And I loved all the photos in it. And reading that piece, I just remember thinking at that time in my life, it was just man, this feels so, I felt like I was in the right place, just kind of doing what I was doing. And then reading that and just kind of, I don't know, identifying with it in a way, because I'd kind of,
It's almost like a little prose poem.
Yeah,
right?
Short and shallow. That's my specialty.
Me too.
No, to me, it was trying to validate my own life, by putting down kind of just the good and the bad things that you only really experience if you're a fisherman, and I still choke up when I read, there's a line in there about the empty place in the bow where a dog named Madison used to sit. And that still hits me 20 years later or whatever, that, those are the things you only know, so I guess, it's like a love song to something that has been the most important factor in my life. And we were talking earlier about just this novel that I'm working on now. And I was going to say it's a weird thing because I'm so comfortable in the fishing world because it's my friends and the people that I know,
so familiar,
and what I do and everything. And so this one's a little scary because there's very little fishing in the book. I can't fall back on sort of the comfort levels, which I thought of that because you were saying it was these pieces, what you were just saying about the what is fly fishing thing, that was so comfortable for me to write because it was, this is who I am. This is who my friends are, And so I'm a little bit out of my depth now working on this thing that is A, it's fiction, B, it's long.
Yeah.
C, and with fiction, have you ever written any long fiction? It's anything can happen. It's not, you're not forced to when I'm writing the narrative nonfiction, it's always I better not bullshit that because Tim was there and he'll know, and now I'm writing and I'm okay, what's going to happen next? a dragon could fly out of the sky and burn them up with like fiery breath. You know, I mean, it's like, I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's been kind of this mind blowing experience of like, I got to control my impulses. Like, cause if you're a lifelong nonfiction writer, you're always held in by these sort of constraints. Right.
Yeah.
And, so now I'm just like, this thing has become all consuming. I'm on my, no fishing, no friends, no fun time.
Yeah.
Every spare minute I have, I'm working on it now. Except for this. So this is this is my whole social interaction for the month. So I'm happy that you guys are here. It's not like I'm hermited up.
Privileged.
It's not like I'm hermited up, but it's, you know, I'm either hanging with the kids or I'm doing my real job. And so the weekends, Friday night, the rare like 4th of July, I was like, oh, that's a day I can work on my book, you know? And so it's sort of a lot like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, where I'm doing this experiment of how long can I go without having fun? Yeah.
I've been kind of working on a project like that, and it kind of stalled out a few months ago because I got busy with other stuff, but I was like, I realized I just need more uninterrupted time, which is hard with a 6-year-old
to do what you
to do this other thing. Like I need to not work. So like I actually have applied for a writing residency, and I've been thinking of actually, you know, this is how ridiculous it is, but like taking a vacation somewhere by myself so I can just go and be in another, you know, state.
Jesus, I can't do that kind of, I won't be able to do that kind of pressure like that. Like,
see, I think I would, well, and that's what I guess what I'm getting at is, do you, you know, and that we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but like with this kind of project, do you feel like you need, you know, a 6-hour stretch of time to be able to sit down and do it? Or can you do it 30 minutes at a time or an hour at a time?
30 minutes is tough. I think, you know, this is weird because it's also not my voice. This is in the voice of a 16-year-old girl, which requires some weird like method acting gymnastics mentally to like get into this. So I can't just sit down and start writing because I got to kind of feel like I'm her a little bit. And I realized in today's publishing atmosphere that that's fraught with all kinds of potential issues around, you know, I forget what the word is, not cultural appropriation, but it's like gender appropriation or whatever. But I'm persisting anyway.
Yeah. Well, and a good editor and some good readers should be able to tell you whether you've hit the mark or not.
Barbara Kingsolver just published a wonderful book called Demon Copperhead that a woman wrote from the point of view of a teenage boy. And so I feel like, okay, that's my example. Like,
do you run stuff by your daughter? I mean, you said she was a little older, but like, it was like what, 4 years or something. I feel like maybe that would.
Yeah, no, I started writing this with the goal of it being done when she hit the age of the character, but she's blown way by that.
You've slacked too much for that to happen.
I went fishing too much during those years, and time just sort of flew by. But so for the first time, I actually feel like I have momentum. I'm making progress. I try to 30 minutes to answer your question is not enough time, but I couldn't just go somewhere to write like that. Like it needs to be in the stream of my regular life. And I feel like when I have energy, I push forward. And when I don't have energy, but I have time, then I revise the stuff I wrote the previous session. And I'm trying to spend, you know, at least 1 or 2 afternoons on the weekend. And so this started like a year ago. I started doing just Friday nights. I was just like, okay, Friday night is working on the thing.
Friday night writes.
But then, exactly. Then I realized, A, I'm exhausted on Friday night. And B, at that rate, I'd be like 95 before the book was even done. And so I was like, I got to, you know, increase this pace. So now it's like whenever I can find a chunk of time, I sit down, and usually through that yellow legal pad that's sitting right there has notes where I wasn't ready to put it into the manuscript in type, but I wanted to remember what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will reach a conclusion, and hopefully it'll be good, and hopefully I won't be chasing the kids around with an axe, breaking down the door.
And it's set in British Columbia, you said?
Yeah, it takes place like in the 80s on the north coast of British Columbia, when there was so much resource extraction exploration going on up there. There was mines being sited, there was big hydro projects, there was incredible amount of clear cutting going on. There was a lot of pretty devastating commercial fishing going on. And so that's sort of the setting for this.
We'll get back to Dylan in a moment, but before we do that, I've got a few words about our sponsor, Decked. I've talked quite a bit about how bomb-proof this truck bed organizer system is, but I don't think I've mentioned as much about their Deco cases. That's D-Co, if you're wondering. The Deco cases are built to fit in the drawers, of course, but certainly aren't limited to that only. I found them to be a great way to transfer essential gear between vehicles, or even straight from my truck to the boat on a fishing day. My smaller Deco case has basically become an on-the-go tackle box, while the larger half-rack 32 has turned out to be perfect for those essentials that I like to keep stocked at all times in the truck for whatever adventures, trips, outings happen. Things like a small camp stove, sunscreen, notebook, pocket knife, first aid kit. It saves me time and stress, plain and simple. Even if you don't drive a truck, these Deco cases might become your new favorite way to stay organized. Of course, Decked products are made in the USA, and shipping is always free. So get Decked and get after it by visiting decked.com/flyfish to figure out which system best fits your rig. I imagine that must stem somewhat just from all the time that you've spent up, in the Skeena region.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? I mean, that's kind of your second home.
Yeah, that's...
Or at least your second fishing home.
Well, even like
maybe your first fishing home.
Yeah, the way things are going around here. Yeah. It's very, it's a really wonderful part of the continent. And it's as much social, like a time to hang out with people that I just don't see enough of. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time, and particularly right after I was divorced, when the kids were small, I was trying to figure out something to do with them that we weren't just sitting here being sad about splitting up as a family.
Yeah.
And so we went with my friend Bruce Hill, he's now dead, but is one of the most consequential conservationists probably ever. And he and Gerald Amos, is a Heisla elder, took us with Steve Perry, the photographer, and then the kids and me, and we took a boat out of Kitimat and went all exploring through the islands up in there. And I started...
So is this... where is this at? Like Kitimat, North Coast, BC?
Yeah, Prince Rupert area, and then out. So it's the inside passage, really. It's all the interior islands that are up in there. And so we spent a week just cruising around, fishing, crabbing, it's a mind-blowing abundance up there compared to here. You know, that it's probably Puget Sound at one time was probably even more abundant than that because we're farther south, but it's not anymore.
There's just nobody up there. Right?
Yeah, and there's too many people here. So, so we went up there and did that. And in the course of the traveling around, we stopped and visited this whale research station. And I just really started thinking, I was like, what if my kids grew up here? What would that be like? And so that's sort of the genesis of this book is it's a fictional account of kids growing up in this remote sort of wilderness wonderland, living pretty much off the grid,
Yeah.
And then it's sort of, I think, the inevitable result of, how, kids are really concerned with fairness, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's not fair, right?
Especially if they have a sibling, right?
Yeah. Now we call it justice and equity and all these other things. But at the very most core of you talk to a kid, especially a teenager, it's like, this grade isn't fair. This, nowadays it's so political, but that these things aren't fair. And so I just started thinking, hey, if you were a teenager and you grew up here and you loved this place and you saw what was happening around you, it would not feel fair. Mm-hmm. And if you were a crazed teenager, what would you do about it?
Yeah.
And so then the stories really just kind of fallen together because I had role models for the characters in my own kids.
Yeah.
I had a setting in mind that is, I think that's Wonderland. I mean, coastal northern BC to me is just like my favorite place.
It's pretty amazing. I've only been as far north as Kimsquit Bay, the Dean, which I was really fortunate to be able to go to and not catch any fish on, but yeah, it's so wild. You get on a plane in Vancouver, you fly just a couple hours north, and there's nothing.
Yeah, when you look out the window of that little Dash 8 that's flying north out of Vancouver, I mean, it is snow-capped, majestic mountains and
glacier after glacier,
and the
mountains
fjords
drop straight to the sea.
Yeah, the fjords, these saltwater fjords that go inland 50 miles, and rivers like the Dean and it really is God's country. And sadly, there's nobody up there except for all these resource extraction corporations that are
and kind of operate under the radar.
I think it's just because nobody's there to see it.
That's what I mean.
The First Nations have been tremendously effective in fighting them off. Mm-hmm. But it's a constant onslaught, and not just, the things that you and I know about, things that I worked on and tried to help, like the Unbridge pipeline and the Lulu Island LNG plant. And like, those are just a little piece of this legacy that goes back 40, 50 years to where like, I don't know if you know this story, but when Alcan built their smelter in Kitimat.
Alcan is
Aluminum Canada.
Okay.
And that facility brings bauxite, which is aluminum ore in its raw form from Jamaica, all the way up there because the government promised them they'd give them free electricity. And to get that electricity, they dammed up one of the major tributaries, salmon spawning tributaries of the Fraser that drained from the coast going east to the Fraser. They dammed it up to reverse the flow of the river out to the coast, and then they drilled a miles-long tunnel through the coast range and send it down these flumes at Kimano on the BC coast. And it's crazy because that's the headwaters that's supposed to go to this interior river going straight out to the ocean because it's been reversed. They displaced an entire tribal nation under flooding of that lake. And even now I've heard that there are sockeye salmon bound for the Fraser that smell it from there and go straight there and can't get up these flumes, and so they just die. And that was done I believe in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Maybe 70s. It's been around for a while. And then as soon as the cost of energy became higher than the value of aluminum, they just shut the plant down and sold all their free electricity to California with no local employment, So it's crazy. The amount of stuff that's going on up there is like, if you start digging into it, it's crazy. Like they're destroying paradise.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's one of these amazing feats of engineering that people will do to make money.
It's tough.
So my goal is to still write environmental work, but to put it in a setting that is more digestible, more interest. I took a lot of inspiration from from Barbara Kingsolver's book that I mentioned earlier, The Demon Copperhead. I mean, that is a book about the opioid crisis, but you would never know it because it's so personal to the characters. It's so, she's not just citing statistics and facts and stuff. It's very personalized. And so, my goal is I don't pretend to be Barbara Kingsolver caliber, but my goal is to try and emulate that.
Yeah. Back to BC, I know you've spent a lot of time up there. You go up there every year. Have you been able to get back to going up every fall like you?
Yeah, last year I had to cancel because we had some family issues going on, and but I went the year before. Didn't go during the lockdown year. When you got here, I was on the phone. I was making flight reservations to go this year
or later.
Yeah,
to go in the fall.
Yeah,
sweet.
Yeah, so I'm hopefully back in a rhythm of being able to go at least 1 or 2 weeks a year. I'd like to spend even more time up there.
When did you start?
Oh God, I've been going for so long. I can't even remember when I started.
Yeah. Wow.
But there's a lot of that resource extraction going on now in that area that is kind of scary to me. I mean, they're basically bringing in a prefab city to Kitimat now. For the LNG plants that they're building there. So it's a little heartbreaking, but I still have really good friends there. There's people that I love in Terrace and Hazelton and Smithers. And, so it's super important. It's one of the most important places to me. I don't know if I could live there year round. I might. I don't know. I mean, at some point I got to figure out where I'm going to live when my, my second kid graduates.
Does it blow your mind?
Yeah. If you read Closer to the Ground now, he was 3 years old in that book, and now he's 6'2" and 180 pounds.
Yeah. I was just thinking on the drive up here, about how, I don't know if I've met them once or twice in like Seattle or something, but I feel like just from reading Closer to the Ground, reading some of the other essays or some of those vignettes in Headwaters and, just knowing you and following you on social media and whatnot, I feel like there's a few people I know that I feel like I've watched their kids grow up, and, but I think especially with that original connection to Closer to the Ground, it's cool. It's special.
At some point, they may feel like I just exploited their childhoods for my own quote unquote fame and fortune.
There's a whole generation of kids that are gonna, give us a reckoning of some sort.
I think for the most part, it's been positive for them.
Yeah.
And maybe there's pieces that they're uncomfortable about that I don't know, but I remember from that trip that we did to BC on the Inside Passage with the kids, there was a photo that Steve Perry shot. It's a beautiful photo of them on the bow of this boat that we were going around in. And there's Dall's porpoises that are jumping like right in front of them. And it was on the cover of the Patagonia catalog at one point. And at Weston's elementary school, one of the teachers had pinned it up on the bulletin board or whatever. And I was like, "Are you okay with that?" And he might have been 8 or something.
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah, it's good for my fame."
So, do they have, or in the past, did they have a sense of you, any sense of you as like, my dad is a published writer. My dad, was there any,
my dad's
was
famous.
there ever any
I don't think there's any cool factor in this day and age of being a published
it just
writer.
Doesn't happen.
I think if I was like if I designed Call of Duty or, like that would be sweet. Right. But yeah, no, I don't know. I imagine
as they get older though, they'll probably be like, yeah, my dad is.
There's probably some of that. I think I felt really, very early on, I realized sort of my own limitations as a father and felt like a really positive thing I could do is to bring them into spending time with the people who had been mentors to me. And so it's sort of like abdication of responsibility as a parent. I could teach them this lesson, but it would be a lot better if Bruce Hill taught them or Yvonne Chenard or whatever. And so I think that's been a really good part of them growing up, is that, you know, Yvonne taught them a lot about fly fishing, because we would go meet up with them in the summer, and I would say, like, okay, go ahead, you know. And it's nice, I think, for them to have had adults in their lives who care about them, that are very accomplished at things that they do, that aren't their dad. You know, and so, you know, Craig Matthews is a dear friend to both kids and has taught them so much about fishing. Yvonne is the same way. Bruce Hill was that way before he passed away. You know, there's been just sort of this number of people that have been involved in their lives through me, but in a way that I can sort of step back and let these people who taught me stuff teach them. And so that, I think, has been a positive benefit of the work that I do. Or the, you know, the people you come into contact with if you're doing this kind of work.
I mean, it, you know, it seems like it runs in the family a bit with your, you know, you're the writer, your brother's art is pretty remarkable.
He's a great writer too. You know?
Is he?
Oh yeah. You know, he wrote his first screenplay 2 years ago, and it was in theaters last summer.
Okay. And what's it called?
Called Shortcomings.
Shortcomings. I have to look it up.
It's directed by Randall Park. It's really funny. It's a really good movie.
That's great.
Yeah, he's a really good writer too. It's a good thing he's not writing fishing stories, or I would be out of a job.
Have you guys, has there ever been talk of you guys trying to like collaborate on any sort of projects?
No, he's out of my league.
Is he?
Oh yeah. He's, you know, he's doing New Yorker covers and writing movies and all that stuff. I'm just toiling away.
Is he older or younger?
Younger. He's 8 years younger than me.
Does that make it even worse?
No, I think it's awesome. Like I mean, in a lot of ways, he's been an inspiration for me, because he's one of the few people I know that makes a living purely doing whatever creative stuff he wants to do. Which is, you know, I mean, when I wrote Close to the Ground, I stupidly thought, like, okay, this book will come out and it'll sell enough that I don't have to work while I write my next book. And then that one will sell, you know, you know, actually Close to the Ground came out and sold enough that I could support myself for about 4 days. And I don't think I could write the next book in 4 days. So, so, but definitely, I think my brother got the superior genes on the creative side. And I just feel really proud of the work he does. It's pretty amazing. Were your parents creative people, artists? Where did that come from for both of you, I guess? My mom just published a book.
Just published a book?
Yeah. She's 80 years old, just turned 80, and published her first book that came out. That's going to be.
She's like, I'm not going to let Dylan have all the fun.
Yeah, it's called The Poet and the Silk Girl, and it's based on her parents' censored diaries and haiku poetry from when they were in the internment camps during World War II.
What?
It's getting a bunch of buzz.
What's your mom's name?
Satsuki Ina, I-N-A. It's an awesome read. Like, it's just, I thought it was going to be this kind of dry historical thing. And it's like thrilling and romantic. And like, it's just an amazing book.
It's nonfiction?
Yeah, it's nonfiction.
And it's based on, what did you say? Based on her parents?
Yeah. So her parents were separated by the government during the internment. And it's based on the letters they wrote back and forth to each other, which went through censorship. So there's big missing pieces.
Like redacted chunks that they've worked.
And then she had, my grandmother kept a diary every day. Like, she had a journal. And then my grandfather wrote a single, like, perfect haiku poem every day. And so she sort of took those things and then wrote her own narrative to hold it all together and give historical perspective of what was going on with the FBI and President Roosevelt and the war. And so it's an amazing read. Like, I read it in 2 days. Like, I just sat down and, so yeah, I guess it runs somewhat in the family.
Well, I mean, was that ever around, that creative streak in her around when you were younger?
She was a single mom, PhD candidate, student, just trying to keep us in fried bologna.
PhD in what?
In counseling.
Okay.
So her whole career has been as a professor and as a therapist.
Oh, okay.
But this book is just an amazing book. Like I think of it like, how old was Norman MacLean when he published A River Runs Through It? It was he was like 75 or 72.
Yeah.
This was like that for my mom.
Wow.
And then my dad, who passed away 2 years ago, was interesting for him because he was the oldest son in a Japanese American family. It was very expected that he be a professional, like academic person. And so he had a PhD in engineering, was an engineering professor. But he always was painting and drawing and designing furniture and played in a band that would I think one of his last gigs was a band performance for the opening of a L&L Hawaiian Foods in Sacramento, California. He's an amazing guitar player. That's his Martin right there.
Okay.
People look at that and go, "Oh, you must be a pretty serious guitar player."
I was eyeing it.
Yeah, I think that's a Martin D45. Like it was his dream guitar. He wanted all his life. I got all his guitars here. I have I've got like a 50-year-old Martin 12-string. I got a cool Steel Body National. I got like all these guitars, and I'm like,
Kopi probably knows all this stuff.
I mean, I know the Resonator Steel Body National is those are, keep them.
It's beautiful.
unless you want to sell them to me.
Yeah. No, and I'm the world's worst guitar player. Like, I mean, literally, I've been trying to teach myself how to play guitar competently for 40 years, and I can barely make 3 chords and kind of hum along. Like, it's just like my left hand doesn't like to do the chords and my right hand doesn't like to do the picking. Like I'm just like the worst. I mean, I'm not this, people are like, "Oh shucks, you're just," I'm like, it's horrible. Yeah.
So you grew up around creativity.
Yeah. A lot of music, a lot of art. And I think,
were they pretty excited for you when Closer to the Ground was published?
Yeah. It was a big deal, I think.
Yeah.
Closer to the Ground, such a personal book.
Yeah.
That it was kind of a weird thing because it was really such a personal thing to put out into the public that I think, some people were like, "Whoa, that's kind of a lot of disclosure," or whatever. But yeah, no, it was very nice. I think my parents were proud.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really sad about Headwaters because my dad died right before it was published, and he wanted to see it, and I didn't show it to him because I wanted to finish the manuscript and give it to him all as like one complete thing. And he died right before I was going to give it to him to read. So, and a lot of that book is kind of about him in a way of not directly, but like it was a lot of, I fished because he was a fisherman. And so it's sort of threaded through there.
I was going to say, I remember having that feeling reading it, that he was kind of there in the background.
Yeah. So that was kind of a disappointment. I guess the thing I learned from that is if there's people you love involved, like tell them you love them, show them you love them, and show them your stuff that they would love to see as soon as you can, because you just don't know. He died really unexpectedly. So it was very,
sorry.
It's just, I try and think about it philosophically. Like when your parent who's 80 years old dies, that's not a tragedy.
Nope.
Feels tragic, but it's not, and I was moping around for a really long time, about a month. And I was walking on the beach down here one of these days, and I was like, wait a minute, like, this is not tragic. Like, why am I acting like this tragic thing happened? Like, it's sad, but it's not some horrible, like this, every single human being on earth, except for the real tragic things, if kids die before parents, which that is a tragedy, right? But every single other person, their parents will die at some point in their lifetime. But it was really sad. Like, it was hard.
Yeah.
Especially I think in reference to this book that was I think, so much something that, you know, you do these things, you want your parents to be proud of you.
Yeah.
To some extent, or at least I still do. I mean, I seem kind of old to be feeling that way, but I think you still do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something to that. My mom died last year, and it, you know, I definitely, I have the same feeling that you do, that, you know, in her case, you know, death is death. And, but I definitely have that feeling of, a little bit of sadness that she about things that she's gonna miss.
Yeah. Well, especially because you have a little kid who's growing up, and that's got to be hard. Like, I think, you know, it's so crazy. I mean, not to be too maudlin about it, but when Skyla was born, so this is 20 years ago, you know, my mom was there, and she was holding her up and said, you know, one day I'm going to come to visit, and you'll be waiting and run down I'm choking up right now just thinking about it. But it's amazing how fast that happens, right? Like at the time I was thinking, like, she's going to run down the stairs to greet her grandma. Like, that's like, you know, she can't even crawl. Like, how do you know? And then, you know, my mom, who was obviously older than me at that point, had the perspective to know, like, oh, this is going to happen fast.
Yeah.
But boy, when you're in it with a little kid, you're just like, oh God, every minute takes an hour, you know, like time's going so slow.
Well, it's either that or it's in fast forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no like normal progression of time.
Right. And I had kids relatively late, and before I had kids, like, you're still probably living this to some extent. Like, every year is kind of the same, right? Like, you have, like, oh, in the spring I go do this, and in the summer I go do this, and
they do seem to go by faster.
But it doesn't really, like, it doesn't change. I probably had like 15 years where it was just the same, right? Like, oh, March and April I'm on the Skykomish. Oh, you know, in June I go do this, and, you know, all that sort of thing. And then you have a kid, and every single month is different. Every year is different. Like, it's totally disorienting. You know, maybe not if you have them when you're 20. Yeah. You know, if you have kids when you're young, it's just sort of this progression of how much you're changing and they're changing. Yeah. But when you're, you know, whatever, 25 to 45, like, your life doesn't change very much. If you've set it up well, you have kind of this regular cadence of the years, and there's no way to really mark it. Could be going slow, could be going fast. It just, you know, and so much of fishing is about repeatability, right? You're trying to learn so that next year you can apply what you learn in the same situation. Yeah. And man, like, and then I had kids, and it was like every minute was different, you know? And so it's kind of mind blowing. I mean, I think you don't really feel time passing until you have kids and you see how fast they're changing. And then time passing starts to be really significant.
And it starts to, I mean, I feel like my experience is that it almost freaks me out a little bit. Yeah. Like, I don't want to miss anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that was why I spent, you know, 18 years without a regular job, was so that I could just be around the kids all the time. Yeah. And then bang, they're like going off to school and doing this and that.
Don't want to hang out with you.
I don't know.
Seems like they still do though.
No, I don't know. I am super lucky in that I have teenagers and young adults that still like to hang out with their old man, and maybe not their first choice. But as long as I'm picking up the tab for stuff, maybe it makes it competitive with their buddies or their girlfriend.
And I apologize for that. I was just like, kind of,
no. That's totally valid.
Generalizing how typically, you know, that goes for.
No, and we've had some of that too. I mean, I think
teenagers and whatnot, they kind of start to like, oh, like, you're like this, I want to be completely opposite.
Yeah.
Or what I did for a while. So
yeah, there's some saying about, like, when you're 16, you think your parents are like the dumbest people in the world. And then when you're 26, all of a sudden you start to think maybe they knew what they were talking about. And yeah. But the one thing that like of all these, there's so many of these like cliches and truisms of raising kids. And the one that always seemed right to me and has remained really true is that, when you have small kids, the idea that like the minutes are long, but the years are fast.
Yeah.
You like one day you look up and they're 7 or 8, and then you look up and they're, they went from an infant to being in 5th grade like that,
it's pretty intense.
Yeah. It
makes me a little bit weepy some days.
Yeah. It's a crazy, and that's, a lot of the stories where there's kids in Headwaters and then all of Close to the Ground was really just me trying to capture some of that, because otherwise I'll forget it. And I'm really bad with the camcorder or taking videos I remember seeing my friends, like, this was before we had iPhones, but they would have whatever, a little camcorder, and they had all these cool home movies. And I'd be like, I don't have any home movies. And so I think like Close to the Ground especially was really just a way for me to record kind of what we were doing, what was going on, what the kids were like, what I was thinking about. And if, 17 people, including my mom out there, felt there was something of value there and bought the book, then awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you focused solely on the novel right now, or have you been writing any essays, stories, for magazines or Patagonia?
I'm working on another
line.
Yeah, I have another
kind of stuff.
Like sort of creative project going. It's a little bit on hold right now because I've been so trying to focus on this novel. But believe it or not, somebody actually bought the film rights for Headwaters. A screenwriter in LA. And so last summer he came up and we spent a couple days. It was awesome, like working process. We had sticky notes all over of how to, because Headwaters, there is no plot. There's no narrative, like all the things you need. So when I was signing the contracts, I was like, are you out of your mind, dude? Like what, like, how does this become a movie? It's going to be the worst movie ever.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, he was saying we need, it's easier to get projects greenlit if there's some intellectual property that exists. And I'm looking at just sort of the character that's in these books, that's in this book. But then creating
the character
a plot.
Being you.
Yeah, but I'm boring. So we created like a
kind of jazzed up a little bit,
like a higher horsepower version. And created, he came up with kind of this plot line and we started filling it in. And so the final screenplay, it won't be anything like really Headwaters other than the setting and the character.
Yeah.
So we were working on that, and I say we, but he's really doing the bulk of the work, but we would go back and forth and I'd send him notes and stuff. And then coming out of the strike, the writer's strike, he's since had to take a job. So he is now in the writer's room of a television show that I won't name here. And so his time has gotten really tight, and it's coincided with me starting to gain momentum on the novel. So we're a little bit on hold right now, but it was really interesting because I don't know anything about writing a screenplay. Just the stuff I've read, and like, I like to watch movies, so transforming kind of the foundation of this character. I mean, it was just interesting. It was an intellectual exercise of going, okay, this isn't me. This is this character. How do we make this character more interesting, more dynamic, and what is the plot that is being driven? And so that was, I've learned a whole bunch. The guy's name is Stephen Day. He's a great writer. Really smart guy. He has good connections. So we made some pretty good progress. I think we'll come back to it. At some point when we started looking at rough drafts of the like screenplay, I was like, so like, this seems pretty cool. Like, so when are we going to, pitch this and get this made? And he's like, whoa. I was like, okay, well, what I was like, what are the chances of this, he's like, well, it has to get this, and then it has to go through this gate, and then it would need this gate, and then you need to find a director, and then you need
that process is like never ending.
There's all these sort of like yes, no process. And I said, okay, well, where we are right now, like, what are the chances? Like, are we looking at like 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in a million? He goes, it's like 1 in a really big number. So, and I think most screenplays don't get made.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most books don't get published, probably, right?
Yeah, except that you can always self-publish a book.
It's true.
And you'd be hard pressed to like actually make a movie yourself. And then even if you did without distribution, like it would just never go anywhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's been kind of a fun diversion. It's, it's exciting. We started looking at like, okay, who would we want to approach to play these characters? I was like, oh, well, Brad Pitt's me, like for sure, obviously, and he's like, no. So that, I mean, it was just fun to have kind of like a little bit of a peek into the Hollywood process.
Yeah.
And it was the time my brother was making his film Shortcomings. And so it was fun to sort of hear what he was doing and picturing like if we could get this to that. Hollywood is such an interesting process. Like, and I've seen enough of it now just around this Headwaters project. Like I can see why it's so hard to make a good film.
Yeah.
Like there's so much money involved. There's so many cooks in the kitchen. There's you write a book, it's either good or bad just based on you.
Yeah.
But with the collaborative process of the film thing, it's so hard to have a single vision. I think if you have the clout, if you're Martin Scorsese, that you can write a script, you can take it to production, you can get greenlit to shoot it, you can edit it the way you want it. But for most of, I think, the rank and file working in Hollywood, that it's by necessity, these collaborative things, and every producer and every casting, everybody that touches it is changing it a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's rare that all those things can line up and the end product is good.
How was that, or what was it like with your involvement in Artifishal?
Artifishal was different because it's a doc, right? So like the documentary process is we got funding, hired a director, and just said, okay, go. And like my contribution was
pretty hands off.
It was an outline of like how to tell this story, very loose, like a treatment. And then, so I wrote the original treatment. I wrote the pitch documents to get the funding. And then I just picked the director and had to get the funders to sign off on it. But and then the director came with a producer and a production company and all that. So that was all him. And then I just provided a list of people to interview, locations to shoot, stories to tell. And that was kind of it. And then boom, it's like a film, but feature films are like this whole other thing because there's so many creative decisions to be made. And there's so much, even on like these indie projects, there's just so much money involved to get anything done. But, if you're going to do a union job, like the floor of what it's going to cost will be expensive. And, the amount of equipment with sound and lighting and all that stuff, like it's this moving village, even on the lean productions. We did talk to Kate about shooting at the lodge at 58 North.
Oh, cool.
So that
for the Headwaters.
Yeah. So that was, if it happens, that's still kind of on one of my dream ideas of that it would be fun to work with her.
Yeah. Have you been up there?
I have. The kids and I went last summer before last.
That's great.
For Skyla's graduation.
Oh, cool.
Trip. We went up there and spent the week, and can't imagine a better lodge experience, better people, better fishing.
Those guys are great.
I saw them. I'm going to listen to that one next. I saw that you had them on the thing, but I love Kate and Justin and have known them for years. I've known Kate for a really long time.
Yeah.
And I would say I don't know another human being that is so concerned with the people around her's happiness.
Yeah.
I mean, she will do absolutely anything to make it the greatest trip of your life.
Yeah.
Same thing with her guiding on the coast in Oregon. I mean, she's like this force of nature. Like, it's miraculous to me of how far out of her way she goes to just make sure people have awesome experience.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite.
I don't give a fuck.
No, I go beyond not giving a fuck. I'll do whatever I can to make sure you have a shitty time.
Nice.
The worst guide in the world.
Yeah, that's right.
Give us some tips of what things that you may or may haven't done, but to, not think like of clients, but just like maybe your buddies or something that like, where, little
yeah,
pranks.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
So Yvonne caught 3 fish this morning. I need to
a lot of
make
it's more
his
subtle.
life miserable.
Some people I know think it's really funny to go somewhere fishing with somebody and strip all their fly line off and then cut it and then wind it back on.
Oh.
And then wind it back on, and they're like, "Oh, there it is! First fish in 4 days."
Oh my god!
Oh god, what happened?
No shit.
I'm not involved in that. I'm just saying some people I know think that that's hilarious when that happens.
Boy,
is it like a newcomer to the group who that
sounds
to?
Like grounds for homicide in some circles.
That's doing someone dirty in a big way. That's really extreme.
Is that a BC story? Bulkley story?
Actually, the first time I saw that was on Christmas Island. But no, when I was guiding, my stuff was way more subtle than that. It was just like, the people that were driving me crazy would always be in the windiest place and with the most mosquitoes.
Or like the deepest wade or something like the coldest, deepest wade.
Oh, the good one is to drop somebody off. So I guided in the lower Alagnac. There's like a 18-foot tidal exchange there, so you drop them off on a knee-deep sandbar and then go to lunch and then come back. And they're like, it's like, that's fun. That's always good. So yeah, after that story was published, I think my prospects for any kind of employment in the fishing industry are like slim to none.
That's funny. Well, you're going up to the Bulkley this fall, you said,
I hope so.
Or to the Skeena region at least.
Yeah, usually. Yeah, I think we'll be the place that we go most of the time now is the Kispiock. So, but we fish the main stem Skeena a lot. Kind of just drive around the whole area there and. Yeah, and it's it's been a while since they've had a really good year. I was wondering,
it's
been
in a bit of a nosedive.
Yeah, it's been lousy.
Years, right?
I think there's a lot of intercept happening in Southeast Alaska. And I think, the thing that's affecting us
intercept in the sense of commercial salmon fishing, picking up.
Yeah, drift gill nets and purse seines and trolk fishery in Southeast Alaska catches a lot of BC steelhead.
Yeah.
And then...
Do you know if there's anything being proposed or done to remedy any of that?
Yeah, Wild Fish Conservancy had a lawsuit 2 years ago that shut down the Juneau troll fishery for kings because those were harvesting most of the Puget Sound kings. And they had, amicus briefs and people signing on from most of the Washington tribes. And they won the lawsuit, but the opposition got a restraining order from implementing it last year. So they fished last year, but they're trying to get it back implemented. I just saw, Fish Safe, for one of the certifiers in BC, is going to stop certifying all Southeast Alaska salmon because of the intercept.
Oh.
So I think there's some action going there. It's, Wild Fish Conservancy has been a real hero there. Skeena Wild, the Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition, and then Watershed Watch. those Rain Coast, all those groups have really been focusing on that Southeast Alaska intercept fishery. So I think we're going to see some movement there. But I really think that, the biggest problem, I said hatcheries earlier, and it's related, but I think, all these studies coming out now show the North Pacific is exceeding carrying capacity for salmonids. And so there's never been more juvenile salmon in the North Pacific in the history of the world. And there's never been fewer adult salmon returning to spawn in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And the fish are getting drastically smaller. I mean, they're, and on years of peak hatchery releases, that's what's driving this, is mostly pink salmon hatchery releases. But on years of peak hatchery releases into the North Pacific, the average size of Bristol Bay sockeye shrinks considerably, like significantly.
Because there's too much competition.
There's just not enough food.
Probably the declining, populations of food.
Yeah, so the food base is shrinking because of climate change and all these other issues, and there's an artificially high number, especially of pink. So, all those pink hatcheries that were mitigation for the Exxon Valdez were supposed to sunset, and the commercial fishermen turned them into privatized hatcheries that exist on a self-taxation basis. So they're pumping out billions of pink salmon juveniles that never would have existed. And then Korea, Japan, Russia are all ramping up their production. And so there's a lot of studies now that are just showing there just isn't enough food. And, you're looking at Puget Sound Chinook that historically averaged 25 pounds. Now they average 8 or 9 pounds.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of wild steelhead on the peninsula this year that were like 4 and 5 pounds, which, used to be a tiny percentage. Those would be the odd one salt fish, but those are 2 salt fish that just don't have enough food.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been impacting the skeena fish as well, either in size or just fewer of them come back because there's so many pinks out there just eating all the food that there isn't enough for the rest of the fish.
Yeah.
That said, I did catch a 41-inch fish year before last up there on
well, that's what I was kind of curious about, just, before we go, when I think of you, I think of steelhead. And because you've been so dedicated to steelhead for so long, and, I just was wondering is there a most memorable steelhead, or is it more of a, most memorable day fishing, or have there been enough that there's not just one, there's 5 or 6 or 10 most memorable steelhead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let me tell you the story of all 275 fish that I've landed. No, I think, now, I'm a little hard up because I hurt my back really bad on New Year's this year. And so I missed the whole steelhead season on the peninsula this year.
Oh, really?
Didn't fish at all. I was on that couch horizontal for 3.5 months.
Oh, Jesus.
In misery. So I'm a little jonesing now, like even more than usual this time of year. But
I went 0 for 5 this winter.
Hey, 5 fish hook. That's good.
It's great. But I'll tell you what, by the 5th one, I was about to start breaking rods.
Well, I was 0 for 0 because I didn't even get out there. So
I shouldn't complain.
I think, steelhead have become pretty hard to come by. So I think like anytime you get a fish now, like it's really something to celebrate.
Yeah.
I got a fish on the sole duck on a really high water day in January, 4 years ago. It wasn't huge. It was maybe 16 pounds, but it was, all hope was over. The water was rising. It was starting to turn brown. And I was standing in front of a bunch of wild roses up to my armpits and water was leaking over the top. And I thought there's no way.
Sounds like the sole duck.
And and I was swinging over this big boulder garden that you couldn't see because it was dark. The water was getting so bad. And, and this fish must have come up out of like from the bottom in 8 feet of water and just ripped the fly. Cartwheel, you know, so that was a really memorable one. Last October, I landed this fish that was 41 inches on the main stem skeena that
over 20 pounds, you think?
Oh yeah, it was
easily.
It was super thick. It was like a baboon fish probably. And so, you know, it was probably, I would guess, like mid to high 20s. It was huge. And it was so crazy because I made this cast. We did this crazy float with a raft and fished all this water that nobody could get to, beautiful water. And then this was the one run that was right in the middle of town.
Of course.
And like the opposite of pristine wilderness on the skeena. And I made this cast, and then, you know, the water was pretty dirty. And so I was cast, I'd make a huge back bend, and then I'd take like 3 or 4 steps and let it really sink and then let it swing across. And so I cast and I made the mend. And then it just started, the line just was looking weird. It didn't start to swing. It was just like that. And I was like, what, is there like a log or what? Like I tried to mend it and I felt something, but I thought, it must have snagged a leaf, you know, it was in the fall. So I put my rod tip down and let it start to swing, and it just didn't swing. It just came tighter and tighter and tighter. And I was like, fuck, that must be a fish. You know, there's no way. And so I kind of pulled back, and I was like
a fish that's big enough to not realize it's hooked.
Well, but he just came up and ate it like right when it hit, and it was just like floating down, and he just ate it. There was no tension on the line. So this has nothing to do with any skill or anything. It was just the blind hog finding an acorn. And then I pulled back and I was like, oh shit, that's a fish. And I yelled, my buddy was down below me. I was like, hey, Rick, I got a fish on. And he's like, oh, okay. He's fishing and I'm fighting it. And I'm like, ooh, boy, that looks pretty big. You know, it rolled and it just threw this huge amount of water. And I was like, oh, he's like, what's going on? And I was like, I think it's a big one. So he's like, winds up, and then he comes up there and he's like, well, pull it in so we can see it, you know? And I'm
Get it over with.
Yank on this way. And then it made this huge run, and then it came back, and we hadn't seen it, you know, but every time it was running, it was like boiling big, like bathtub size, like, like chunks of water. And then it finally came in close, and it wasn't ready to tip over yet, but it made a pass that was within viewing of the thing. Yeah. And Rick was like standing behind me on his phone doing something, and he was just like, come on, get this fish, whatever. And it swims by, and I go, oh shit, there it is. And he goes, holy fuck. Oh my God. Holy fuck. His like phone goes flying. And then, I mean, like, it was so big that like, we just couldn't believe it. And then we finally got it in, and he's like, well, hold it still. I'm trying to get a picture of it. And I had it in the water, and the wrist of the tail was so big, I couldn't get my hand around it. Yeah. So I was like trying to kind of lean back on it. So that was super memorable. That was cool. That was really recent. And I think, you know, fishing's been pretty tough on the skeena the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years. And so just to hook that fish, I think was pretty mind blowing. And I think, you know, in the 90s when I was fishing the Skykomish a lot, that, you know, usually if you got a fish, you'd get more than one fish out of the run that you got the fish in. Yeah. You know, and so we had a lot of 2-3 fish days. I had some 5 and 6 fish days on the Skykomish. And when we started going north, that's what it was like on the Bulkley and the Kispiox. The skeena was weird. Like they could come through and you could hit a whole bunch and then nothing, or you could just get nothing. Yeah. But in the good runs on the Bulkley or the Kispiox, there were times where you could hook 10 fish, you know. And I haven't had that kind of fishing in a long time up there, which seems weird, you know. And I haven't had fishing like that on the peninsula probably ever. Yeah. You know, I think I've got 2 fish out of a run once. Yeah. But you know, I think steelhead like to be with other steelhead. And so if you
makes sense that they do.
Yeah. If you find one and there's a decent run in the river, you're probably going to find several. Yeah. Like in that same spot. I think there was a day on the Skykomish. This was in 1990, maybe 96 or 97, at the run that used to be called IRS.
Mm-hmm.
And I hooked 5 fish. We got there at 10:30 or 11 in the morning. And in the next 2 hours, I hooked 5 fish.
Jeez.
I landed 3 of them, and they were, there was an 8-pounder, there was a 14-pounder, and there was a 28-pounder.
28?
Yeah, the 28-pounder was 40 and a half inches long, but it had a girth that was 23 and a half inches. It was like that big around in the middle.
Jeez.
I can show you guys a picture of it. It was like mine had sea lice all over it. Like, I mean, it was just like came in on
what
that
river
tide.
did you say it was?
On the Skykomish.
On the Sky.
So the Skykomish, when it was good, the 3rd week of March was reliably the 20-pounder week. Like every year for 9 years, either me personally or one of my fishing buddies got a fish over 40 inches that week, year after year after year. So yeah, I don't know. I hope we see days like that again. I don't know if we will, but it sort of keeps you going. You could be like,
yeah.
I had one day in the Skeena 2 years ago where I think I hooked 6 fish in a day.
Just you.
Yeah. But they were all in one spot. They were in this weird swirly hole for some reason. I don't know why. And it was almost impossible to fish. And so I think people just weren't fishing it. And I was dumb enough to just let one swirl around there and hooked a fish. And then I came back and hooked another one, came back and hooked another one.
Yeah.
And my buddy was on the other side of the river going, what the fuck? Like, so that felt a little bit like the old days,
picked the wrong side, bro.
but then I had like 2 days without a touch after that. So,
yeah.
I think it's still pretty hit or miss. Did you hook all 5 of your fish on the OP, or were you fishing somewhere else?
Elsewhere. I'll tell you when we're done.
Oh, come on.
Come on.
It's a little, I probably could tell you, but I won't.
South or north of the OP?
South.
Okay. All right. That limits the options.
I had a day, excuse me. I had a day a number of years ago with a buddy where we touched 4 fish out of one run. And up to me, like, that was unheard of because, I caught way less steelhead than you have. But it was, like maybe I'd see a friend land one or I'd land one in a day. Like,
yeah.
Maybe I'd had a day where I'd hooked or seen 2 or 3 combined. And between the 2 of us, it was 4 fish. We were like, what? That was best day ever. Like, this is freaking incredible. And
but that's that should be a regular occurrence if
again.
The baselines hadn't shifted, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just because you came to it too late. Yeah. And I think, the last time we had fishing like that was in Puget Sound was in the 90s, and I think the 80s were even better. I just wasn't there for it, and probably, the 70s, maybe not so much because the gear hadn't evolved enough. People were still trying to figure out how to put
painting lead on their fly lines and stuff.
Yeah. And they were, trying to cast shooting heads and the flies were shitty and stuff. But I think wow, if you had the technology now with these interchangeable sink tips on Skagit heads, and you had the modern fly technology, intruders and stuff, and could go back to 1989 or 91 on the Skykomish. I mean, you would crush, because we were crushing then and didn't even have spay rods when we were starting.
Yeah.
I don't think I had a spay rod until 94 or 95.
Yeah.
And there was nobody to teach you how to do it. So I would go out there and just beat the shit out of myself, casting 12 feet all day. They say this makes it easier. Fuck, I can't even stand up at the end of the day. And it was I remember that Rio was selling one of the first commercial spay lines.
Yeah.
And it had this little Jim Vincent, instructional booklet that came with it, and you'd be standing on the river looking at double spay, lift this way, and then sweep it down here. And I mean, to this day, my spay casting's totally fucked up because I just had to try and teach myself all these ridiculous ways. People that are good at it, like with modern spay casting, like look at me and go like, what is wrong with you, dude? Like,
what are you doing?
I'm like, I can cast far enough to catch fish. It ain't pretty, but I can get it out there. But yeah, it's crazy because I don't even feel like an old dude. Like how could that have been the good old days, Yeah. And I guess that's what everybody does. You should have been here when I was young,
Yep. For sure.
I sure hope that we can do, collectively enough to, I don't know if we're going to bring it back to what it was in the 80s and 90s, but I think there's hope that it could be that way. I think if we got rid of the hatcheries and might be farther north because of climate change, but, I think at least in our lifetimes, I think some of these rivers, if you took the hatcheries out, you'd see numbers of fish that nobody alive today has ever seen.
Yeah.
Just by not spending the money on running the hatchery.
Yeah. Can't
convince anybody to try it, but, and in the few places that they have tried, it's been incredibly successful. So my hope is that we at least don't lose any more ground. And I don't think that's likely. I think it's either going to get better or worse because I don't think it's sustainable at the levels of fish populations we have now.
Yeah.
So I think we make some radical change. It could be a lot better. I think if we keep doing what we're doing, it's going to be gone. Just from genetic diversity and stuff, the stocks are getting so small now that I don't think it's sustainable. But look at the Elwha where nobody did any supplementation. They left them alone, and there were pure summer steelhead genetics in the rainbow trout trapped up above that dam. And there's like 500 to 800 fish a year in there.
Yeah.
And growing population.
Yeah.
If we leave these fish alone, we could have amazing fishing.
I know that's the thing I always come back to is like, we just have to give them what they need and then leave them alone. Give them habitat.
We don't even have to give them what they need. We just have to give them half of what they need.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be that great. It just has to be marginal and they'll adapt and they'll come back. I think that's the amazing thing. I guess why it's more sad to me is that if we blow this, it's because we did it purposefully. Like it wasn't an accident that we're still spending millions of dollars on hatcheries that we know are detrimental to wild fish. Yeah. Right. We're still supporting deadbeat dams that we know if we took them down would be better. And the hatchery thing is the most maddening to me because you don't have to blow up a dam. You don't need a budget to do all. You just need to stop spending the money and it'd be fine. Yeah. Yeah. If you wanted to be really proactive, you could keep the same budget. You could run the same facility and have the workers with the same employment, and all they would do is habitat restoration. Yeah. The same 5 guys that man the hatchery would be taking out culverts and planting trees and whatever. Same budget.
Doing creel surveys. Like
whatever.
Getting data.
Yeah.
I know.
It's not
such a massive waste of money.
It's not a matter of employment. And it's not a matter. It's just we're extirpating salmon and steelhead because we're choosing to do it. Yeah, which is crazy, mind blowing to me. Yeah, but
for sure.
So we should end on a better note than that, right?
Well, man, I was just gonna say I hope that that BC is good to you this year. And
I hope so too. I hope the kids and I can fish in Montana in a couple of weeks. It's looking kind of bleak now.
Do the kids ever go up to BC with you for fishing trips?
No, we haven't done steelhead fishing yet.
Do they have any interest in it? Or are they like, no?
No, there is some level of interest. I think just because they know it's something that I really love to do. Oh.
Kind of save it.
And it would be epic, if they caught a steelhead, but there's so much time between fish these days. Yeah. And, especially my kids have gotten so stoked about surfing that if we have spare time and we're going to go do something outside, mostly they want to go surf. Yeah. And
that's awesome.
Steelhead fishing here, it means the peninsula. It means winter weather. Yeah. And it means a high likelihood of not catching a fish. So I haven't imposed that on them. I think last year Weston said, he's like, yeah, I think I'm ready to try for steelhead. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But
we're going to do it.
That's kind of the way to do it. I feel like is like, let them decide. Cause I remember having a client at the fly shop in Seattle that I used to work at. And he was really into steelheading, and he had a little boy that was like 8, 9, 10 years old that the kid loved fishing. And so he would kind of take him out steelheading, swinging flies, and the kid would never catch a fish. Yeah. And I was like, this kid is going to be scarred because this kid is fish obsessed.
Cold and wet.
And,
caught a fish.
And he would go for it. This kid had a 2-hander. He would cast and swing flies. But I was like, man, I don't know how long he's going to be able to sustain this.
It's weird because like I don't mind not catching fish now, but it's because I've caught enough that I know what I'm doing could catch one.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were just starting right now, I think steelhead fishing would suck. I think it would just be brutal because it's the worst weather of the year.
I mean, I started 10 years ago and it sucked.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know what I was doing. And so I didn't know if I was doing something wrong. Now I know there's just not really fish around, or I just lose them.
You know what I kind of like about that? Cause I'm in the same boat. I've only been steelheading for about 10 years. And I don't know. I mean, I've caught maybe like 20 or 30 fish or something like that.
Shit, in 10 years. That's awesome. You're doing good, man.
I might be exaggerating that, but like somewhere in that range, and maybe it's only 20 or 90.
No, I'm not calling bullshit. I'm saying that's awesome. That's great. Like, that's good.
And what I like about the kind of, not catching fish is that it's made me become okay with not catching other fish.
Yeah.
And not like feeling like I suck or I'm a failure or like fly fishing sucks. But it's just like how it goes. It's fishing. There's a lot that isn't up to us.
That's such a good perspective.
And so I'm kind of okay with it because I think it's like, tempered my attitude a little bit more. Whereas like, if it was like, boom, 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 like, I don't know, like maybe I would just like, yeah.
Well, it's personality based, right? Like some people need lots of small fish action. Some people only need the occasional big fish action. Are you a permit fisherman or a bone fisherman?
Yeah.
Right. Like what is your thing? And I think, the beauty of being a steelhead fisherman is you are the lowest pressure, most favorite client of any guide that you ever fish with. Cause they're going like, red fishing, like you got to get like this many a day. Where you're like, fuck, I don't care if I get one grab. I'm like having a banner day. I'm a steelhead fisherman.
Yeah.
And so so I think like it's a good perspective. Like I think that it's,
and also kind of like, takes our attention off of like it needing to be about fish and also seeing everything else out there that we do when we are fishing, like whatever it's for.
Yeah,
and the
birds,
the people that we're
sky.
with, like all the peripherals that sometimes, where you are in your kind of fishing journey or whatnot can kind of get clouded over by like whether or not like you did catch a fish. And so I think it's kind of nice in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. I think, that it's a perspective, right? Like how you feel about the need to catch fish or I know people that are 80 years old that still want to catch 50 trout in a day. And I know people that are happy to just sit on the bank and look around, that are 25. So I think it is perspective. And I think it's not only a good perspective, it's kind of a requisite perspective in the way things are now, that like you can't count your self-worth on how many fish you hook in a day. Cause it's, unless you're carp fishing, which I don't even want to get into. We could just end there.
Come on, we got a couple more hours.
We can end there. I'll just end it by saying the only way that you can ever get me to unfollow you on Instagram is post a picture of yourself holding a carp and you're dead to me.
That's awesome.
You know why? Aside from the fact that they're like slimy, disgusting things and I don't want to fish for stuff that I'm afraid to touch. Besides that, If you live in the Pacific Northwest and you're fishing for carp, it means you fucking gave up. You've given up. You could be spending all the hours you spend chasing carp doing something to help to save the native fish of this area, salmon, trout, and steelhead. So if you're fishing for trout, you have given up, and that's untenable to me.
Oh boy.
You might want to edit that so that like all the people that are, forced into carp fishing now don't hate my guts.
Oh, it's all right. I love carp fishing. Kopi loves carp fishing. I still like you.
You're dead to me. If I see that picture on Instagram, it's the only reason I've ever unfollowed anyone on Instagram.
I'm gonna start sending you lots of carp pictures.
We should show you I should show you my camera roll from last week.
Well, even
slap it out of my hand.
McCoy had some shot of something where they were carp fishing, but you couldn't see the carp like in the picture. And I just sent him a note, said, "You're getting dangerously close, bud. Like you're right on the line."
But
okay, well, that's a good place to wrap it up.
We can
get the haters. Yeah,
for sure. It was great to see you and great to chat.
Yeah, thank you guys for making the trip here and for talking about all this stuff. And love what you're doing with the podcast. And like I said, this is the only social contact I've had in like a month. So
there you go.
Friday night.
Yeah. Woohoo.
Well, we'll take you carp fishing soon.
All right. No.
As always, thanks for listening to Sidechannels presented by the Fly Fish Journal. Sidechannels is produced and edited by yours truly, with production support from Jeff Galbraith and Colin Wiseman, and digital and web support from Jesse Lou Galbraith, Colby Messick, and Kopi Vojta. If you're enjoying Sidechannels, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to rate and review the show. It makes a big difference and helps new people find the podcast. Thanks as well to our sponsors, Decked. Get decked and get after it at decked.com/flyfish, and Patagonia. Dependable gear built to connect with wild fish. Visit patagonia.com/fly-fish to learn more. Have fun out there, enjoy the process, and we'll see you in a couple weeks with episode 8.